My name is Ross Simmonds. I'm a digital marketing strategist and entrepreneur. I'm the founder of a handful of different startups, but the one that has the vast majority of my attention would be Foundation Marketing, which is a content marketing agency that works with ambitious brands to create, distribute, and plan content that drives meaningful results for their business.
Love it. And of course, Safi Media is one of those ambitious brands.
That is 100%. I can't say favorite, but let's say one of my favorite clients that we have on the roster right now. I know others will probably listen to this who are also clients, so I'm not gonna put out any favoritism out there. But I'm super excited.
Just a little bit.
A little bit. I'm super excited to be working with Safi Media. It's been a blast to work with you and see the evolution of the brand. And I think the world is going to be in for something special in the months and years to come for sure.
That's right. Look out. So I have really loved, I've known of you and known you for years in kind of different capacities. Yeah. And it's been really cool to see your evolution as an entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about how you got started, as an entrepreneur and in marketing.
Definitely. So it's definitely been a long journey. I've been an entrepreneur for pretty much as long as I can remember. In elementary school, I was creating board games, and that became a bit of a mini hustle before it was actually even realized to me that that was a hustle and a business of my own. In high school, I sold do-rags out of my locker, and that was awesome. And then in university, I started a fantasy football blog, and that fantasy football blog really opened my eyes up to the internet. I was creating content, I set up affiliate sites, and I was generating enough income to really pay for a good chunk of my tuition. But my marks quickly started to fall through the cracks. Like I started to see my biology marks all crumble. My English class, I was starting to fail. And my mom brought me into the room and she had a tough conversation. And she was like, look, you need to get these marks up. So while my football blog's traffic was going up and the marks were going down, she told me and gave me some advice that essentially changed my life. She was like, take your blog that you're writing about fantasy sports and start writing about what you're learning in school. So I started to write about marketing. And at the time, there was only a handful of marketing blogs. I knew when I graduated that I wanted to get a marketing job. I didn't know where to kind of even get started. I didn't have any uncles or aunts who could say, hey, Ross, come work at my ad agency or work in my company and do marketing. That type of opportunity didn't exist. So I used that marketing blog to really put myself on the map locally. And over time, the more I wrote content, the more I started to create, I started to see that this internet thing was actually global. So I was living in my parents' basement, writing this content, and I started to get emails from people all over the world saying, hey, Ross, we loved your take on Gen Z marketing. Can you come down to Florida and speak at this event? I was like a 22, 21-year-old kid getting these emails, and I was like, this internet thing is either fake and they're not actually real people trying to fly me down, or this is kind of cool. It turned out that it was really cool. And I ended up doing a lot of gigs on the side just through my blog, went into the ad agency world, learned the rules of the trade in that regard, and then left and started up Foundation. And at the early stages, Foundation was just rosssimmons.com. I was a solo band, and eventually things just continued to evolve and grow. And now we're a team of pretty much 20 folks all over the globe creating content for brands.
So cool. And in fact, I actually remember being at one of those early talks. So I can remember Rustam Southwell introducing you.
Right.
He was saying, this kid is like 21. You talked about worms.
Right.
I remember you talked.
Yeah. I do remember that. Oh, that's.
I was like, who's this kid? Who is this person? It was so funny.
That's
so interesting. So really it went from blogging to about a topic that you were really creating content. To getting hired to speak. What is it about content creation that creates that level of authority?
Right.
I find that people they underestimate it. They're like, but this is extra work. I'm like, are you kidding? This is
it's important work. It is everything. I think it's a fundamental disconnect. Like there's the vast majority of the world is consumers, right? Like the vast majority of us consume content every single day, and we don't really take a step back to understand what we're doing. But when you consume content, you're essentially opening your brain to say, I am willing to receive and take in whatever information this person is giving me. And what you don't often realize is that the information that you're receiving is actually shaping the way that you view the world. It's shaping your mindset. It's shaping the way that you might navigate into different situations in the future. And that's very powerful. Content at its core has shaped and makes up a lot of the culture that we see around us today, but we oftentimes don't think about it that way. And what we all now have the ability to do, now that we all have the power of a smartphone or from a laptop and the actual access to reach people, has never been easier, and the barriers to entry to create are so low. We now all have the same power that some of these more traditional media companies would have had in the early days of kind of their storytelling. So it has kind of equaled the playing field in many ways. And now by creating content, you can become an authority. And simply due to the fact that the vast majority of people still to this day do not create, you are automatically viewed as an authority because you are a creator. You are putting out information, you're putting out insights, you're putting out your thoughts, and people start to pay attention to that because that's what we as humans do. We take in information. So if you are the provider of information, that is going to help you differentiate from everyone else that you're competing with.
And what do you say to people who I will hear sometimes saying things like, does the world really need another podcast? Or I hear that people are starting podcasts every day. Or does the world really need another blog? Who cares about what I put on LinkedIn? It's so saturated. Like I hear this. I blithely ignore that personally, but I'd love to hear your take on that. Is it too saturated? Can you still stand out?
Yes, you can definitely stand out. And here's why. If I was to name Nike, Reeboks, Adidas, Gucci, Coach, Allbirds, Crocs, all of those brands are just footwear, right? But they're all a little bit different. They all have a different ideology behind them. They all have a different look. They all have a different aesthetic. And if all of those brands said, yeah, do we really need to create a new sneaker? Do we really need to create a new heel? Do we really need to create a new pump? Do we really need to create a new sandal? Then we would all be wearing the same shoes. But the reality is that different people want different things. Different people want to connect with different types of stories and brands, et cetera. In the same way that I might be a big fan of Reebok pumps, someone else might only be a fan of a traditional white, like Jordan or something. I don't know, right? Like everybody is different. So the way that I would view it, if I was a content creator and I was being told, hey, there's enough podcasts out there. There is no podcast on the market today that has your exact voice, with your exact experience, with your exact stories, and the perspective that you would bring to the table. And thus, it is different because a whole group of people have not heard you before. And those people might resonate with you more than they resonate with the other person, the same way that some people think Crocs are really nice shoes. You won't catch me dead wearing Crocs.
Who in the hell are those people? Unsubscribe, guys. No, I'm just kidding.
I think it's kind of ironic when they wear them. I think the Crocs are like this ironic, cool thing. Totally. But like people will resonate with different things. And I think that's the same truth that runs through content as well.
I remember hearing it expressed that you might be the only gospel. Yours might be the only gospel that someone can hear.
Right.
Like they couldn't hear it from anybody else, only from you.
That's fair.
So I love this. And here's a question. I have definitely noticed in my own evolution as a content creator. So I started my business as a blog. I was blogging about stuff that was important, was building an audience that way.
Yeah.
And have continued to kind of add different dimensions to the content production. But more and more, I sort of feel this pull internally that I want to start, for me, it's about creating super high quality, creating some core, super high quality content. Yep. Have you noticed, as the content marketing world matures and shifts and changes in 2021, like how important is quality? What are some of the core things that we should be thinking about with respect to making our content stand out?
Yeah, I think it's a great thought. And the reason is simple. Like I mentioned, it's never been easier to create content, but it's also never been harder to stand out because there's so much content that exists. Like every single minute, I believe there's hundreds of thousands of tweets published. I think there's hundreds of podcasts published. I think there's thousands of blog posts that go live. Like we are competing amongst a lot of noise. So to stand out, you really do need to double down on quality and try to bring to the market new insights, new information, and new stories that have never been told before. And I think that's very important. The way that you differentiate is you essentially need to look at what content exists today on this specific topic and how can I be better than it? How can I be 10 times better than what already exists? There's that old saying of always strive to be like 2 times as good. You need to do that across every single asset that you come across and you're trying to replicate. You have to ask yourself, how can I be 2 times better than what was already published on this specific topic? And if you can't be 2 times as good, then you might want to move on to the next one to find something else that you can create better than someone else. And I know this might seem intimidating for a lot of people who are just getting started in content, and they might be thinking, whoa, wait, how in the world can I create something better than someone who has a full studio, someone who has an entire team, who has been creating for years, etc. I understand that that can kind of feel intimidating. And my advice to you would be this: just start by pushing yourself to your own limits of what you can create. And if you can start by just pushing yourself constantly, what you're going to find is typically a surprise at the end when you create something that is better than you even thought you were capable of developing. And I think that that's where you will unlock the magic. And you know that it's something that you're kind of pushing towards when you feel uncomfortable and you feel like this is going to be challenging, this is going to be a lot of work. And right before you hit publish, you're thinking to yourself, this is it. Like, I'm either going to be met with a bunch of backlash, like people aren't going to like it. I'm either going to have a realization that this wasn't as good as I thought, and I'm going to be met with crickets, or this is actually going to take off. And when you have that feeling of a bit of doubt, a little bit of like just complete stress and uneasiness around whether or not it's going to hit, that's when you know that it's something that's potentially able to change your life, your career, your business, etc.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I love that you said that because I have had that experience recently. So, as I have been kind of talking through strategy with you and Andrew, one of the things that was so clear is how fundamental this podcast is to our business, to our listeners. It's huge, and as I thought more and more about it, I mean, I love the 80-20 principle personally. Right. Like that's my guiding professional principle. So I was like, for sure, I'm going to put like a huge amount of attention into the podcast. Made some changes in how I did it. And I can remember just before I was like, I don't know. I like this, but I don't know if it's going to work. Right. Like this is different where I'm doing something really differently in terms of how I'm creating this show. Right. And it was fun and exciting. And I'm super happy that I did it and the results are working really well. Right. But I can totally relate to what you're saying. Yeah.
It's that concept of inertia, right? Like when you are going down a path and you feel like this is just happening, it can be difficult to just like stop yourself from going the same way that you've done it for so long. And sometimes you just have to shake things up and throw something.
You gotta get up. Exactly. So we're going to talk about this concept of distribution here in a moment. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about this really interesting, rather disturbing phenomenon I noticed when we started working together. So for people who are listening, I'm a fan of B2B SaaS marketing and just kind of always have been. I like the way, I like the approach. I like white papers. I like case studies. I like, just fact-based marketing that's interesting. And I was like, I want that because that type of marketing, it's all about scaling, building an audience, and so that's why I reached out to Ross and his team, who work with a lot of different brands, but have a strong reputation in B2B SaaS. Right. So I was like, I'm a coach and that's who, this is the company for me.
This is the 100%. Company we're going to go for.
This is the company we're going to go for. And I just think, but that's also disruption too. Like
It is.
you can like look for people outside your
Yeah.
space and industry who can bring a different take.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we quickly saw, and I couldn't see it myself,
Mm,
but I think many people who are listening can resonate. So as an entrepreneur, if you've been publishing, if you've
right.
been creating content for a long time, which I had been, your brand will evolve,
Yep.
but you've like shed all these snake skins,
Mm,
you know?
right.
So there's like all these kind of these online digital shadows of
Yep.
where your brand was.
Right.
And one of the first things that we did was really kind of take a look at that and audit that. But I wondered, how much has that happened to you? And
Yeah,
how much of you, like, yeah, let's talk about sort of the digital hangover
for sure.
of of
Yeah.
posts past.
100%. We can definitely do that. So one of my least favorite sites, but one of my favorite sites is the Wayback Time Machine. And with the Wayback Time Machine, you can plug in any URL and it is constantly crawling the web, taking screenshots of websites. So if you took one of your websites, eleanorbeaton.com,
Don't
example.
anybody dare do that. Don't anybody dare do
Plugged it
that.
in.
Only me.
You could go back into time and see what that site looked like in 2008, 2009, etc. So that site, if you take rawsimmons.com and you plug it in, you will see a website that says thoughts of a modern ad man, and it has a silhouette of me trying to be a version of Don Draper in the
I
modern
was going to say
era.
David Ogilvy.
Yeah, it is hilarious. But 100%, I had to evolve that site. I had to evolve that story. The ad man concept was super hot when I jumped into the game because I watched Mad Men while I was in university. I was like, that's what I want to be. There's no real role that looks like that. So it is definitely an evolving game of kind of shedding the old skin. No doubt about it. I
Yeah.
100% feel that.
Right. And the interesting thing is, and the big takeaway, I think, for people. So if you're new in the game, this is going to be a lot less of an
Yeah.
issue. It might take you 5 minutes to audit.
Right.
But I mean, if you've published hundreds of podcasts, hundreds of blogs, hundreds of
Yep.
microsites over the years, you have this long tail of
Right.
history.
Yep.
And I think that idea of really going back as with fresh eyes, of really tracing how you're showing up,
It's
it's so
important.
important, right? Because for cold traffic, like people who don't know you,
Right.
you're starting to create this disjointed experience. And I thought that was a really insightful takeaway. And so before we started really launching into
Yeah.
an updated content strategy,
Yep.
we took a lot of time to clean stuff up.
Yep. It's true. We had to get the house in order. And I think that's a key part, that it's easy as a business owner to forget about the house that you've kind of built and
Yeah.
forget to keep updating your wallpaper, right? Like, and wallpaper back in 1992 might have been fresh. It might have looked great.
Yeah.
But as you fast forward to 2021, that wallpaper needs to come down. And actually the wood beneath it is actually stunning. And the brick that you covered is now stunning. So you need to start redoing and updating those things. And oftentimes when you're in the business, you're just like focused on revenue, you're focused on prospects, on closing, customer service, all of those things. And you forget about the house that you built to get to that point. And you have to, as a content creator, take the time, at least I always say annually, like annually do a gut check of, okay, we know where we're going. We know where we want to be. Let's do a quick review of all of our properties and make sure that the story that is being told on those channels is aligned with the story that we want today. And also, let's do a Google search for our name and understand what shows up. Because whether we like it or not, the perception that our brand has is what shows up when somebody types in your name. And you want to own that. Your name is one of the most important things that you have. So you want to make sure that what shows up when people do a Google search is aligned with the story that you want told.
Well, and I love this because, of course, we're living in an age where people don't just have one website. They typically have very targeted microsites. So I
Right.
think this idea of step one, how about we log our online properties?
Yep.
Number two, let's do an audit every year. Just check them out, especially the core ones. Is this
Yep.
updated? Does this make sense?
Right.
Are we pointing to microsites that we don't want to use anymore?
Right.
Right. And then three, really taking a look at that sort of gut check. Is this aligned? Googling yourself. That makes total sense. Because honestly, one of the things that I noticed was that because that online presence was somewhat disjointed, what was happening is that it actually diminished the effectiveness of the marketing that I was doing, because you're sending out this really clear message, and then people are going and looking at properties you didn't know it existed, and they're like, what?
Right. It's not connected.
So they're not up. It's not connected. And so then you don't get the returning traffic. You don't get the opt-ins, all of these things that are so important. So that's huge.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to treat your online properties like Disneyland. Like when you go to Disneyland, they greet you, they're shaking your hand. It's a full-on experience. You're going down a ride, you're in the lineup. There's a bunch of things that you can play with, but it still all has that essence of Disney. And I think every owner needs to think the same way, because we would if it was in a physical property. If it was in person, we would make sure that the person who walked into our store was met with a smiling face. When they left, we walked around the counter and gave them their bag. We would send them that text. But for some reason online, because it's not in our face all the time, we overlook it. So you definitely want to make sure that you have your house in order.
Yeah, I dare you to create a video that's called, "Is your website giving side eye?"
Ooh,
I think I'm you know what? I'll be the first one to comment.
All right. I like it.
Okay. So to move on. So once you've got that house in order, and I just really wanted to touch on that because it was really important for us as a company to really go and take a look at that. So then the next step is, let's talk about content. So a couple of episodes ago, I talked about how having an anchor platform, that's what I call it, having a core place where I show up. That's like the core place where I'm going to create content.
Right.
It's my podcast. And actually I have two, because it's like my podcast and also my email, my blog. But guys, you don't have to do that. I'm extra. So the idea is having this anchor platform where you're creating content.
Right.
Now, one of the things that's so intriguing about your guys' philosophy is this idea of distribution. So tell us, what is distribution and how does it work when you relate it to this concept of an anchor platform?
Yeah, definitely. So when you think about content, you think about an anchor platform. For the vast majority of people, they think that the job is done when they press publish. For the vast majority of people, they'll hit publish on something and they will hope and wish that people will respond positively, and they hope that someone is going to spread it and that it's going to be a viral hit. What is often underestimated is the importance of viewing not when you press publish as the end, but instead as the beginning of the life cycle for that asset that you've published. And now starting to go into a methodology and a mindset where you now need to distribute and spread that asset across a lot of different channels, whether it's sending something out through Twitter, LinkedIn, a Facebook group, your email list, etc. We need to be more intentional around distributing our content. In the early days of the digital media wars, where BuzzFeed kind of broke onto the scene and started to capture tons and tons of traffic and traction, there was a New York Times study that released why they were losing market share. And in that study, one of their heads of media talked about how for them internally, they had the luxury for decades of having their properties delivered to the front steps of Americans all over America. And when they would receive it, they would have their distribution because it was right on their doorsteps and that was in front of them. When they were publishing their stories, their journalists weren't tweeting about them. Their journalists weren't sharing it on LinkedIn. They weren't sharing it on their own Facebook account. They just sat back and expected people to want their stories. What BuzzFeed did that was different was that BuzzFeed actually intentionally took their content, they wrote it in a way that would generate social shares. They shared it across Facebook. They went into Facebook groups and spread them. They did everything they could to make their content generate traction. And as a result, they were able to take a significant amount of market share and ultimately redefine the way the media companies operate today. So as creators, when you look at your anchor platforms and you're creating great content, you're telling stories, you need to be thinking about how you can spread those stories after pressing publish.
So this idea of, you talked about how BuzzFeed created content in a way to generate social shares.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this concept for a second and really break down why people share content.
Let's do it.
Why do they?
Yeah, so there's actually another study that was done on why people
This
share.
is so geeky.
I
Oh
know.
my gosh, so nerdy.
There was a study done on this, and I love it. It was a study, again, done by New York Times. And essentially, it comes down to a few simple factors. So we share content online to bring value and entertainment to other people. So we want to provide value to our friends. We want to make our friends laugh. That's why we'll share things on social. We also share things because we want to define ourselves to others. So during football season, I will share things when the Philadelphia Eagles are doing well because I want to define myself to my friends as a diehard Eagles fan. You also share things to grow and nurture relationships. So when I'm forwarding something to my partner, I'm doing it because I want to strengthen our connection, our relationship. When my mom tags me on something about being a great son, it's because she's trying to grow and nurture my relationship. So that is, again, a reason why people share. Another reason is self-fulfillment. So we want to feel fulfilled as individuals. We want to feel like we are doing things correctly and that we're navigating the world correctly. And this is why inspirational and motivational content does so well. And the final thing that was incorporated in this study is to get the word out about a cause or a brand or a business that we believe in or that we want to support. And if you can do those things, bring value to people, to help people define themselves, help them grow and nurture relationships, help them feel self-fulfilled, or get the word out about something they believe in, people will share and distribute your content.
So fascinating. And so here's a question for you then, because what I'd love for you to do is to kind of walk us through
Yeah.
what, like in your experience. So if you can choose like one of your most favorite pieces of content that
Right.
you've created, from that straight through to kind of the end.
Yeah.
So let's start with the ideation.
Right.
Now, you are in the digital marketing space.
Yep.
But so not everybody who's listening is. However, take
Right.
us through the thought process of how you decide what a great core piece of content is going to look like.
Right. So I love this topic. So for me, it always starts with being very curious about what content and what stories people already want. So I have this philosophy that I call the Sherlock Homeboy approach. And the Sherlock Homeboy approach, it's an awesome name. I know.
An amazing name.
So with the Sherlock Homeboy approach, you're essentially going to go into communities and spaces where your audience spends time. And you're going to study and look for trends around the content that generated the most engagement. What content in this Facebook group generated the most likes, started up the most heat, started the most arguments, debates, etc. What content in this forum stirred up a lot of responses, got the most replies? What content in a subreddit generated the most upvotes? You look for the content that generated a lot of love, buzz, controversy, whatever. Once you identify those stories, you then start to reverse engineer how you can apply that same idea to your own brand, your own industry. For example, at Foundation, we target SaaS companies. So I went into a bunch of communities where SaaS founders were spending time, and I looked at what concepts they talked about a lot. One of those concepts was the idea that there's billion-dollar businesses to be made out of what is called Excel and spreadsheets. So if you can look within organizations and see how they're using spreadsheets, and you can say, all right, most people are using spreadsheets for invoices. Most people are using spreadsheets for approving expenses. People are using spreadsheets to keep track of vacation. Within each of those use cases is a software company that someone could create. They could take that spreadsheet, that template, and turn it into a business. To me, that's an insight. It means that there's an opportunity within Excel templates to create a business. So I wrote an asset, a blog post called The Unbundling of Excel, and why Excel presents billions of dollars of value for the next SaaS company. So I then took that piece, wrote a blog post about it, created a visual to go with it, and then I took it and I sent it right back to that community. And within minutes, it made it to the top engaged posts for a week. It broke our website's numbers in terms of traffic. It lit the internet on fire. We were able to get a ton of traction in the community because we noticed a trend early on. We noticed that a lot of people were subtly referencing as Excel as being a competitor, as being a thing that they could replicate and they could come up with ideas from. So we created a piece all about that. Now, for most companies, they would have submitted it and they would have called it a day. Or most companies would have sent it out on Twitter and called it a day. But instead,
not Sherlock Homeboy.
Not us. No, not at all. Sherlock Homeboy goes a different path. I started to investigate other communities where these people would be spending time and started to repurpose that same asset into formats that they would engage. So I took a screenshot of the graphic and I shared it on Twitter with SaaS founders. I shared it whenever somebody was talking about Excel. I would constantly plug that link so they would see it. I went to newsletters that talked to SaaS entrepreneurs and I just sent them an email. Hey, I think you will like this article that we published on this topic. Let me know what you think. I think your audience is going to love this. And they spread it through their newsletters. So we were able to distribute that content consistently, and we still do today. That's, again, another thing that most entrepreneurs and creators forget. Just because something was created 6 months ago, 9 months ago, 12 months ago, doesn't mean it's still not relevant to people today, because there are billions of people in the world. And if you had 5,000 people look at your piece of content, guess what? There's still billions of people who haven't seen your content. And those thousands of people might not have been online the first time you shared it. So the life cycle of an asset exists a long time after you press publish. So that same Excel piece that I've written probably 2 years ago now is going to be shared on Twitter probably next week. It's going to be shared on LinkedIn. I'm probably going to rework the title and then resubmit it to a different community, because people in the industry are going to be new. People who follow me on these networks are going to be new. And I can now provide them with an asset that, while it's old, is still new to them.
Okay, so genius. And so a couple of questions. I want to break this down even further. So the idea, so let's talk about the creation of the original asset, because it's kind of like garbage in, garbage out a little bit.
Sure.
Like if the asset itself isn't really solid. Right. So I think that the insight around how you came up with the idea, genius. So then you go to create the content. And if you guys, go to foundation.co, I think it is
foundationinc.co. Yeah.
foundationinc.co. Check out the blogs and case studies, and you can really see like the quality. So they're very well researched, all of that. Tell me about your, when you're creating something, you're like, I think this is the potential to be viral, the potential to have a lot of, how much time do you spend as CEO of a company with 20 people? And I get that, how much time do you spend creating that piece of content? Because you still do a lot of your own content creation.
I do 100%. So typically it would take me about 4 hours to create an asset. And that would be from start to finish. So I wouldn't say that includes the ideation process, because I'm always on in terms of trying to figure out what an angle could be. Mm-hmm. I think about this stuff like while I'm sleeping. I had a dream last night about my next asset idea. Like, those are things that I'm just always thinking about. Like, my mind's always on that, just because I'm a genuinely curious person. But when it comes to creating it, it's about a 4-hour effort to bring to life. And do you do it
like start to finish? Do you typically kind of block out time to do it like that?
Yeah, so I typically block off my Wednesdays. I have this thing called Wired In Wednesdays, where I focus my time on creating content. It's something that I've done since 2013, where every Wednesday I typically take no meetings, no calls. I'm just plugging in my headphones and I'm creating content. So I live and die by my calendar. It's one of the most important things in kind of my life, and I use it to schedule my time to create content. So in that creation process, I open up a Google Doc. I start to drop in links to things that are relevant to this story that I'm going to craft. I start opening up a spreadsheet to write down ideas of things that I want to chart out, etc. I also have a notepad handy, so if I do need to kind of whiteboard something or write something out or a visual, I'll scratch it out by hand at first and then use that as inspiration for a design element within the actual content that I'm creating. So I then just write down the title of the article, write down some of the key points, break them down, and then I just play a little bit of Mad Libs and start filling in the blanks appropriately as the ideas kind of start to come to my mind.
Nice. I love that. And I quite frankly get irritated when everyone's like, you should be outsourcing your content. And I'm like, you're whack. Like, I would never do that. Yeah. Some people maybe, but I just want people to understand that I think still as a founder, your voice is important, and especially if you like content, I love content.
Exactly.
Right. So
100%.
So this is so cool. So let's take it from there.
Yeah.
And I know that you have team members who do distribution now,
Right.
but it sounds to me like you still have a bit of a geeky thing. And I say
Yeah.
this in like geek. To me,
I
that's a
understand.
compliment.
It's a compliment. I
Still,
take it.
right? You still have a geeky thing
Yeah.
around being guerrilla style around distribution. So when you like, how much time, especially initially, did you spend doing the outreach to get it distributed, sending to
Yeah.
the blogs and sending like,
Right.
so 4 hours to create.
Yeah.
Tell us about the time spent to distribute.
Yeah, the time spent to distribute is probably 25 hours plus. Like, and it goes up as time goes on. So the time is on your side when it comes to distribution, because I believe you create once, you distribute forever. You create something one time, 4 hours, sunk cost, that's done. Then you have to distribute it. And sure, most people will spend 4 hours to create something and 4 minutes to promote it. I think that's the most broken approach in the world. You need to double down on the distribution of the assets that you're creating and spread them as much as possible, because it's that old saying of, if a tree falls down in the woods, does it make a noise if anybody's around? It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if it makes a noise because nobody heard it. And the same thing exists.
Who cares?
Who cares, right? Like the same thing with your content. If you press publish, nobody sees it. Does it matter? No, it has no.
Okay. So this 25 hours, and we're getting super tactical here, but
Yeah,
the devil is in the details. God is in the
it
details.
is.
So this 25 hours, is
Yeah.
this happening? So let's say you hit publish on a Monday.
Yeah.
When is this initial 25 hours of effort around distribution happening? How long is that effort spread out, that sort of initial level effort? Because you said you're not actually done after
No,
25 hours. So
exactly.
tell us what that looks like.
Yeah. So the first 25 hours probably starts with a 30-minute sprint after publishing it. So for the first 30 minutes of pressing publish, I'm writing a newsletter that's going to go to my list. I'm writing 4 or 5 tweets. I'm sending out a LinkedIn post. I'm sharing it on my Instagram story, and I'll probably share it on LinkedIn. And then I'm going to get a nice drink and go downstairs. Then after that, the next day comes, I start to see some traction and I start to think about, okay, how else can I spread this thing? I start going into communities. That's an extra 30 minutes or so. This is all again in the first week, but essentially at this point on day 2, I've only spent an hour. Now, as time goes on, that original asset that I created is now going to take on evolution into different formats. I might write an entire new blog post that's going to reference this blog post and incorporate it at the beginning. I'm also going to consider creating a video about that blog post, and I'm going to link to that blog post in the caption on YouTube. Or I'm going to go on my Instagram story and record a reel about that blog post or something. I'm going to do a Twitter thread about that. And all of these things are going to happen pretty organically over the course of the next 4, 5, 6 months. So the 25 hours is actually spread out over 6 months or so. And I'm also going to be receiving emails from people. And what's going to be plugged in my signature, potentially one of my most recent blog posts. So I'm going to reference that in my signature. So that's going to hit up every single person that I'm writing for a short period of time. I'm going to do a talk. And at my talk, I'm going to reference, hey, folks, I just wrote this blog post on Foundation Inc. You can learn more about it here. That's also distribution. So when I say create once and distribute forever and it's 25 hours, you're taking a very long-term look at how that asset is spread and distributed. And it could be inclusive of mentioning it on a podcast. The blog posts that we've been talking about around the Sherlock Homeboy idea. If somebody's listening to this and they Google Sherlock Homeboy, I please encourage you to do so. You're going to find a blog post on that concept. So now I'm distributing that content through this podcast. So that is the way that you want to distribute your content long term. And that's how you get 25 plus hours into the distribution game.
Yeah. Another one I'm going to recommend people take a look. I think it's Canva's Backlink Empire.
Yes. Yeah.
I loved that one. So so a couple things, when we think through the details. So I love this concept. It's so super tactical, but this idea, so if you're thinking through distribution and you're thinking tactically how you distribute, so how often, because I think about how often are you creating a new piece of content
Yeah.
that warrants that level of distribution.
Right. Not all assets are created equally. Not everything that you create deserves or needs the same amount of love and engagement as the other pieces. They all have different goals and they all have different roles in your business lifecycle. For example, if we hire someone new at Foundation and that person joins the team, that's not something that is going to be distributed forever. The week that that person joins the team, we're going to try to promote it. We're going to amplify it. That's going to have a different role, though. It's not likely that that asset is meant to raise our thought leadership perspective. It's to help us attract better talent. It's to help us build a great culture. It's to help us amplify that person's authority in the industry. It has a different goal than something like the Canva article, which is meant to be more thought leadership piece, long form, generate leads, generate revenue off of the back of that type of a piece. So everything that you create is different. And I think that people and entrepreneurs and creators should also view their content as different. Like not everything is meant to get a bunch of social shares. Sometimes a piece of content just has the sole role and goal of ranking in Google. And that is okay. If you're just creating something that is meant to just rank in Google, you don't need to try to distribute it because you're just trying to get it to rank. But if
You know what? That's a good insight because some of the stuff that we've done specifically for SEO,
yeah,
it's not, you know what I mean? I'm like,
not
now that
the
isn't the usual flair that
right, exactly.
Yes.
It doesn't, yeah, like some of that content doesn't have the flair. It doesn't have a great headline. It's not necessarily the most interesting piece in the world either, but it's going to do the job as it relates to good old fashioned search intent. Like we have a piece on our website that is just a bunch of stats on LinkedIn. And that piece does numbers in terms of traffic. It had at one point we ranked on the first page of Google for the word LinkedIn. So people were looking for LinkedIn and our website was showing up, and that generated hundreds of thousands of visits to our site. Now, I'm not going to share on Twitter, hey folks, check out these 50 links or stats on LinkedIn. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. But somebody is in an office right now thinking to themselves, I wonder how many users are on LinkedIn. And when they go to Google and they type that number in, Foundation shows up. Okay, that's interesting. So now we have somebody learning about LinkedIn on our site. They're able to say, thank you to this Foundation brand that educated me. Now we have some rapport with that individual. So that goal of that piece of content is completely different than a teardown asset where we're going in depth with research on a SaaS company and their growth methodologies.
Yeah, which probably won't necessarily have that same SEO kind of impact.
It won't. Exactly.
So this is so interesting, you know, and I think to really loop it back and close the loop in terms of why content is so important, I have 100% found that the quality of leads who come in because they responded to high quality content. So maybe they heard the podcast.
Yep.
And then they decided, so then they go and they look you up online.
Yep.
And then they start researching. The quality of that lead is so much higher. And by quality, I mean, they know you, they searched you out, and now they're approaching you because the time is right for them. And there's this sort of trust factor than potentially like a lead that you bought from Facebook. You know what I mean? It's just, it's really worth the time and effort. Yeah.
100%. And what you're able to do is filter out some of the noise, right? Like by having content out there and created, some people will be able to look at it and be like, yeah, I'm not a good fit for this. Like this doesn't work for me. And they will weed themselves out of your funnel, which is great because 100%. You can't work with everyone. So I think there's a lot to be said for creating content and just the benefits that it can bring you as a lead generation tool, but also as a lead filtering tool as well.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Lead filtering is a whole other, like there'll definitely be a lot of content that I create with high levels of attitude in an attempt to, you know, let people who don't to filter out. If they don't resonate, then I know we're not going to be a good fit. So
exactly. Yeah. That's key.
Listen, so this is amazing. I'm so psyched to have you come and do a masterclass with the incubator, by the way. That's happening soon, which is going to be super exciting. So we'll break down these concepts more. But for people who would like to kind of learn more about you, about your thought leadership, where can they go? Where should we send them?
So let's connect on LinkedIn. That's probably one of the easiest places to connect with me. Ross Simmonds, Simmonds. You could also find me on all of your favorite platforms. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, on YouTube, etc. Definitely feel free to connect with me on all of those platforms. I always love connecting with ambitious people trying to do ambitious things. But Eleanor, thank you for having me. I love what you're doing with the community. I love what you've been able to create, and I'm rooting for you, and I'm super excited to be collaborating with you in the months to come. So thanks for having me. Keep up the great work. And yeah, it's been a blast.
Thank you.